The wind at Ashfall never sleeps. That is the first thing you learn on that plateau, and the last thing you forget. It comes down off the burnt ridges in the dark before dawn, cool and dry, dragging the smell of sage and old ash with it. And by the time the sun clears the eastern rimrock, it has already changed its mind 4 times about which way it means to blow. I have spent 19 years standing on that firing line, and I have watched better men than me lose their whole reputation to a single gust they never saw coming. The wind at Ashfall does not respect a man's record. I learned that lesson slow, and I learned the rest of it in one morning, from a private I never even looked at twice. My name is Cole Brannigan. When this story happened, I was 51 years old, a retired master sergeant kept on at the marksmanship detachment as a range instructor, and if I am being honest, as a kind of monument. The younger shooters would point me out to the new arrivals. That's Brannigan. He's got the long record here. 2,100 meters cold bore first round. Nobody's touched it in 11 years. They said it the way you'd point out an old cannon in a town square, something that had done its work long ago and now mostly gathered pigeons. I did not mind it as much as I let on. A man gets to a certain age, and the thing he did best is behind him, and he can either make his peace with being a monument or he can turn bitter in the shade of it. I told myself I had made my peace. I had not. That morning proved I had not. It was qualification day. The fall long-range trial the detachment ran twice a year, and the line was full. 22 shooters had come up from 3 commands to certify on the extreme distance course, and the visitor stands behind the firing line were crowded with the usual crowd: instructors, a few officers, the armorers, some enlisted men who'd wrangled a pass just to watch other men suffer. Ashfall's long course is famous in a small, cruel way. It is not the hardest range in the country by pure distance. It is the hardest by wind. The target line sits across a shallow basin where 3 draws feed cold air in from 3 directions, and the mirage on that basin at mid-morning will lie to you like a paid witness. Men who shoot clean at 2,000 meters on flatter ground come to Ashfall and cannot keep a round on the steel. That is the point of the place. That is why the record mattered. I got there before first light, the way I always do, and walked the line while the flags were still dead. There is a discipline to that walk. You read the frost on the grass. You feel the air on the back of your neck. You note which draw is breathing and which is holding its breath. By the time the shooters started arriving, I could have told you the wind would swing hard from the left draw somewhere around 1000 hours, and then quit on us entirely just when a man least wanted it to. I did not tell anyone. Nobody had asked me. A monument does not volunteer. The shooters came up in 2s and 3s, big men mostly, competition lean, carrying their rifles in hard cases like men carrying their own good name. I knew a few of them. There was a staff sergeant named Doyle out of the Southern Command who had beaten half the country at 1,000 yards and thought Ashfall would be a formality. There was a lean sergeant called Vane who'd taken second at nationals and had the quiet confidence of a man who does not expect to be humbled. And there was the range master. Master Gunnery Sergeant Orland Pike ran the Ashfall line the way a hard preacher runs a small church: total authority, no warmth spared, and a deep suspicion of anyone who had not suffered the way he had suffered to earn a place at his altar. He was 60, sun-cured to the color of the rimrock, with a voice that carried the length of the basin without a bullhorn. He and I had come up together, more or less, and there was respect between us, but it was the respect of 2 old dogs who had bitten each other more than once. Pike believed in the range. He believed a shooter was the sum of what the range had beaten out of him, and he believed, with a certainty that never once cracked in the years I knew him, that he could look at a person and know exactly what they were worth on the steel. That is where I have to introduce her, though at the time she was not anyone to me. She had come up in the last truck with a load of range detail, the enlisted bodies the detachment used for painting targets, dragging the marking frames, hauling water, all the ugly work that keeps a range running. There were 6 of them, all privates, and she was the smallest, a young woman with her hair scraped back hard under a soft cap, sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms brown and corded from work. She carried the water cans two at a time when the men carried one, and she did it without any show, without any sign she wanted it noticed. She had a plain, still face, not pretty in the way that draws the eye, not plain in the way that turns it, just still, the way a deep pool is still. I remember she set the cans down at the line and looked out across the basin toward the target berm the way you'd look at an old friend across a crowded room. I did not think anything of it. I did not think anything of her. That is the shame I have to carry out of this story, and I am carrying it straight, because she earned that much from me at least. The sun came up over the rimrock and turned the basin gold, and the flags along the target line lifted, one by one, and began their lying. Qualification was about to begin, and in the whole crowd on that line, the champions, the officers, the range master with his certainty and me with my monument silence, there was exactly one person who could read what that wind was going to do that morning. She was standing by the water cans, unlooked at, waiting to be told to go paint a target. I want to tell you I saw it in her that morning. I did not. I saw a private with the water detail. God forgive me, that is all I saw. The trial ran the way asphalt trials always run, which is to say it ran cruel. Pike set the course at increasing distances, and the first stages, out to 1,000 meters, sorted nobody out. These were good shooters. The best 3 commands had to send, and 1,000 meters in the calm of early light is a formality for men like that. Doyle shot a clean stage and grinned. Vane shot cleaner and did not. The crowd made the small appreciative sounds a crowd makes when it is watching craft, and the morning had the easy feel of a thing going according to plan. Then Pike walked the line up to the far stage, and the plan died. The extreme distance stage at Ashfall is shot at the long steel, a rank of hardened plates set at the deep end of the basin, the farthest of them at 2,300 meters, which is a distance most people cannot even conceive of as a rifle shot. At that range, the bullet is in the air for better than 4 seconds. It climbs out of the barrel and arcs up higher than a 5-story building and comes down out of the sky like a thrown thing. And everything, the spin of the earth, the fall of the temperature, the density of the air, every separate breath of wind across 3/4 of a mile of ground, everything gets a vote in where it lands. And at Ashfall in that basin, the wind does not cast one vote. It casts a dozen in a dozen directions, and it changes them while the bullet is still climbing. Doyle went first at the long steel, because Doyle had the reputation to lose and the confidence not to fear it. He built his position slow and careful, dialed his dope off the range card, waited for what he judged to be a lull, and broke a beautiful shot. I watched the trace of it through my spotting scope. You can see the bullet's wake at that distance, a faint disturbance ruling a line across the mirage, and I watched that line bend. It bent because the left draw had started breathing early, before Doyle's read said it should, and his round sailed a full body width off the plate and kicked up a rooster tail of dust on the far berm. He shot again. He shot a 3rd time, correcting each time, chasing the wind the way a man chases his hat down a windy street, and the wind stayed 1 step ahead of him the whole way. 3 misses. Doyle came off the gun with his jaw tight and said nothing, because there is nothing to say. Ashfall had shown him the door. Vane did no better. Vane was, if anything, the finer shooter, and he was too smart to chase. He took his misses, adjusted his whole read, and settled in to wait for the wind to give him the same condition twice so he could shoot it clean. But the basin will not give you the same condition twice. That is its whole nature. Vane waited 11 minutes for a repeat that never came, and when Pike finally called his time, he had put 1 round on the 2,000-meter plate and none at all on the deep steel. A national medalist. 1 hit. One by one, they came to the long steel, and one by one the basin took them apart. Not with drama, Ashfall does not do drama, but with a patient, total refusal that was worse than any drama. The good shooters missed cleanly and knew why. The lesser ones missed and did not know why, which is its own kind of unmaking. By the time the sun stood high, and the mirage came up off the basin in shimmering sheets, 21 of the 22 shooters had run the deep stage, and not one of them had put a round on the farthest plate. Not one. The record I held for that plate, cold bore, first round, 11 years unbeaten, sat on the wall of the range shack behind us like a thing that had begun to seem impossible even to me. I looked at that far steel across the shimmering basin, and for the first time in years, I was not sure I could have made that shot myself anymore. The wind that morning was the meanest I had seen it in a decade. I say all this so you understand what kind of morning it was when Pike lifted his head, looked down the empty line of failed champions, and called the thing that started everything. There was one more slot on the roster. A no-show, some shooter from the Northern Command who had not made the trip, and Pike, being Pike, did not like to leave a slot on his roster unaccounted for. He looked at his clipboard, and he looked at the assembled crowd behind the line, the officers, the instructors, me, and he raised that basin-filling voice of his and called out, flat and half-mocking, the way a man calls out when he already knows the answer is no. "We've got an open lane on the deep stage. Anybody here still think they're qualified?" He said it to the crowd. He said it over the range detail entirely, over the 6 privates standing by the water cans and the marking frames, because it did not occur to him, it did not occur to any of us, that the question could possibly include them. They were the help. You do not ask the help if they'd like to attempt the shot that just broke 21 of the best rifles in 3 commands. Pike's eyes went across that detail the way your eyes go across furniture, and came to rest, half a joke, on me. "Brannigan, want to defend the wall." And the crowd laughed. Not cruelly, it was an affectionate laugh, the laugh you give the old monument, but it was a laugh at the idea that anyone present could do the thing that needed doing. I felt my face heat. I did not answer, because the honest answer was that I did not believe I could make that shot in that wind, and I was too proud to say so and too proud to fail in front of the men I taught. I let the laugh cover my silence. A monument does not volunteer. That was when she stepped forward. She did not say anything at first. She just set down the water can she'd picked back up, and she took one step out of the line of the range detail, and she stood there small, still-faced, sleeves rolled where Pike could see her. And the laugh, which had been an easy, rolling thing a second before, changed its shape. It did not stop all at once. It sort of came apart, man by man, as the ones who saw her went quiet and the ones who hadn't yet turned to see what the quiet was about. Pike squinted at her across the line, as if she were a smudge on his clipboard. "You lost, Private," he said. "No, Master Guns," she said. Her voice was low and even, no push in it, no nerves. "You've got an open lane, I'd like to shoot it." For a moment nobody said anything at all, and the only sound on that whole plateau was the wind moving through the flags on the target line, that soft, ceaseless, lying sound. And then somebody in the crowd laughed again, one short bark, and that broke it, and the mockery came in like water through a cracked dam. I heard the words go around. "The water girl. She wants to shoot the deep steel. Vane couldn't hit it and she wants a lane." Someone said, not quite under his breath, that maybe she wanted to paint the plate a color they could hit. There was a general loosening of the crowd, the ugly good humor of men who have been humbled all morning and are grateful to have someone beneath them to look down on at last. Doyle, who had missed 3 times and was still sore about it, said loud enough to carry, "Give her the lane, Guns. I want to see this." He wanted to see her fail. He wanted the basin to do to her what it had done to him, so his own failure would look less like failure and more like the plain nature of the world. Pike did not laugh. I will give him that. Pike never laughed at a shooter, even one he did not believe in. But he did not believe in her either. It was written in every line of his weathered face. He looked at that small private the way he looked at everything, certain he already knew her worth. And what he saw was range detail. Water cans. A private with corded forearms and no rifle case and no business on his line. "This is the extreme stage, Private," he said, and his voice was not cruel but it was final, the voice of a man closing a door gently but all the way. 2,300 meters. National-level shooters missed it clean all morning. This isn't a place to make a point. "I'm not here to make a point, Master Guns," she said. "I'm here to shoot the lane." and still there was no heat in her. That is the thing I keep coming back to all these years later. Every man on that line who spoke did so with something riding on it, pride or spite or the need to be right. She had none of that in her voice. She asked for the lane the way you'd ask for the salt. And I think now that her stillness was the first true thing I saw about her, though I did not read it right at the time. I thought it was a private who did not understand what she was asking for. It was, in fact, the exact opposite. She was the only person on that plateau who understood precisely what she was asking for, down to the meter and the mill, and that knowledge had burned all the noise out of her a long time ago, somewhere I could not yet imagine. Pike looked at me. It was a quick look, half a question, should I even entertain this? And God forgive me, a second time, I gave the smallest shrug. Let her have the lane. Let the basin teach her the lesson it teaches everyone. I thought I was being kind. I thought a hard miss on the deep steel would be a mercy compared to a lifetime of wondering. I was thinking of her the way you think of a child reaching for a stove. I did not once consider that she might reach for it and not be burned. All right, Pike said. He said it the way you concede a small point to end an argument. Draw a rifle from the ready rack. You've got the lane. And then, because he was Pike and could not help the last word, try not to hurt anybody. The crowd chuckled. She did not react to it at all. She just walked to the ready rack, and that was the first moment, the very first, that I felt the smallest cold finger of doubt about my own certainty. Because of how she walked to that rack. There was no hurry in it and no drama, but there was something else, something I had seen maybe 3 times in 19 years of standing on firing lines. She walked like a person walking into a room she had built. Like the range was hers and always had been, and she was only now getting around to letting us know. I told myself I imagined it. I picked up my spotting scope, and I settled in behind it to watch a private miss the deep steel, and I wanted on the record that I was smiling a little when I did. The ready rack held the detachment's loaner rifles, good guns, well kept, the heavy-barreled long-range platforms the school used for instruction, but loaner guns all the same, not the custom rifles the champions had brought up in their hard cases zeroed to their own hand. A shooter's rifle is a personal thing, tuned and known the way you know your own handwriting. To shoot the deep steel cold with a strange rifle off a rack was a thing no one on that line would have volunteered to do. Doyle had shot his own rifle and missed 3 times. And here was this private, reaching past the fine-cased guns she had no right to, taking down a plain school rifle she had never fired in her life. She lifted it and checked it the way you check a thing you were about to trust your name to. She ran the bolt slow and felt the lockup. She pressed the trigger to a wall and eased off it, learning its weight. She looked down the bore to the light and turned the rifle in her hands and read the whole of it in about the time it takes to read a man's face. And when she was done, she gave a small nod to herself, not to anyone, as if the rifle had answered a question satisfactorily. Then she took up a data book from the instruction table, one of the blank range books the school kept for students, and a pencil. And she walked to the open lane at the far right of the line, and lay down behind the rifle in the dust, and she did not look at the target at all. She looked at the wind. I have to explain what that means, because it is the whole hinge of what came after, and if you have never done this thing, it looks like nothing from the outside. It looks like a person lying in the dirt doing nothing. But reading wind at extreme distance is the deepest art in the whole discipline, and the mark of a master is that they spend far more time reading than shooting. The champions that morning had read the wind, of course. They were not fools, but they had read it the way you read a road sign quick to get a number to dial. She read it the way you read a face you love slow for everything it was not saying. She started at the muzzle and worked out. The flags first, the line of range flags marching across the basin, each one telling her the wind at its own spot. But she did not stop at the flags. I watched her eyes track down low to the grass heads, to the way the sage moved in the near ground, to the drift of dust off Doyle's old rooster tail still hanging faint over the far berm. And then she found the mirage, that shimmering boil of heated air rising off the basin floor that lies to every shooter about distance and truth. And she read that, the boil and the run of it, the way the shimmer laid over to one side and then the other, because the mirage at a given point tells you the exact wind at that point better than any flag, if you know how to see it, and almost nobody knows how to see it. She lay there and read the length of that basin in strips, near to far, the way a man reads a long and difficult letter, and she made small marks in the data book, and she did not touch the trigger. Minutes went by. The crowd, which had settled in for a quick comedy, began to shift and mutter. This was not the show they'd wanted. They'd wanted a private to throw a wild round down range and eat the basin's ordinary cruelty. Instead, they were watching something they did not have the vocabulary to understand, and it made them uneasy, the way people get uneasy watching a thing they cannot name. I was not uneasy. I was riveted, and the smile had gone off my face because I did have the vocabulary. I knew exactly what I was watching. I had done it myself on my best mornings, 11 years and more ago. I had lain in that same dust and read that same basin strip by strip and felt the whole living map of the wind assemble itself in my head until the shot became not a gamble but a conclusion. I knew what it looked like from the inside. And I was watching it happen from the outside. To a private the range master had told not to hurt anybody. Beside me, an instructor named Hollies leaned in. "What's she doing?" he said. "Why isn't she shooting?" "She's reading it," I said, and my voice came out lower than I meant it to. "Reading what?" "The whole thing," I said. "She's reading the whole basin." And I did not say the rest of what I was thinking, which was, the way I used to, the way I'm not sure I still can. Hollies looked at me. He had never heard that tone from me, I think, but I could not take my eye off her because she had stopped writing now. She had set the pencil down. She had done her reading, and her stillness had changed. It had gone from the stillness of a person gathering to the stillness of a person who has gathered, and is only now waiting for the one thing left to wait for. Her cheek came down to the stock. Her breathing slowed and lengthened until I could barely see it. And out across the basin, 3/4 of a mile away, the far steel plate sat in the shimmering heat, the plate that had beaten every champion 3 commands could field, waiting. Down the line, Pike had stopped looking at his clipboard. He was watching her now too, and the certainty on his face had not cracked yet, but it had gone still, the way the wind goes still right before it changes its mind. He had seen 10,000 shooters lie down on his line. He knew, the way I knew, that this one was lying down wrong for a person who was going to miss. There is a posture to a shooter who does not really believe, a hedging in the body, a bracing against the failure they half expect. There was none of that in her. She had built her position the way a mason lays a wall, each part carrying the load it was meant to carry, the rifle riding her bones and not her muscle, and she lay behind it as settled as a stone in a stream bed. Pike saw it. I watched him see it. And I watched him not want to believe what he was seeing, which is a different thing from not believing it. "She hasn't dialed," Hollies whispered. "Brannigan, she hasn't even touched her turrets. How's she going to?" "She has," I said. "Look again." Looked, and he saw what I'd seen, that while we were talking she had come up off the gun for a moment, made her adjustments to the scope with 2 quick sure movements, and settled back down, all in the space of a breath. She hadn't chased the dials the way Vane had, agonizing, dialing and redialing. She had read the basin, done her arithmetic somewhere behind that still face, and put her firing solution on the rifle in one motion, the way a man who knows the answer writes it down without checking his work. Everything about her said the same thing, and it was a thing that made the hair stand up on my arms. This is not the first time. This is not the 100th time. This is a person who has done this 10,000 times in wind meaner than this, when the miss cost more than a laugh. I did not know yet where. I did not know yet what she was. But I knew, lying there watching her through my glass, that I had made a terrible error of the eye that morning, and that the whole line had made it with me, and that the error was about to be corrected in front of everyone in a way none of us would forget. The wind was building toward the swing I had predicted at dawn. I could feel it on my own neck now, the left draw waking up, the cool press of it coming across the basin from the deep draws, the thing that had killed Doyle's beautiful shot an hour before. In a few minutes the whole condition would heave over to the left and hold there hard, and a shooter caught mid-solution would have to throw out everything and start again. Any moment now. I found myself, absurdly, wanting to warn her. "It's about to swing, the left draw's coming, don't shoot into it." I did not say it. She would not have heard me, and anyway I understood this a half-second later, and the understanding went through me like cold water anyway. She already knew. Of course she knew. She had read the same signs I had, read them better, read them without 19 years of standing on this exact plateau to help her. She was not going to be caught by the swing. She was waiting for it. That was the thing I finally grasped, lying there in the dust beside my spotting scope with my heart going like a young man's. She had not been slow. She had not been hesitating. She had read that the condition was unstable, that the wind was about to make its big move, and rather than shoot into the churning middle of it the way every champion had that morning, she had chosen to wait, to let the wind swing all the way over and settle into the hard, steady left condition on the far side of the change. The one clean, holdable, readable condition the whole basin would offer that entire morning. The one that would last maybe 40 seconds before the wind got restless again. She was not waiting for the wind to give her the same condition twice, the way Vane had waited in vain. She was waiting for it to give her one condition she could trust once for long enough. And she had known it was coming because she had read it in the grass, and the mirage and the drift of old dust, the whole living map of it, and she had staked everything on a piece of wind that had not arrived yet. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since. It is one thing to shoot a hard shot in a hard wind. It is another thing entirely to sit in the dirt calm, while champions fail all around you, and choose your moment out of a chaos that no one else in the county can even read to say, in effect, not this wind, not this one, not this one either, this one, and to have staked your whole name on your read of a gust that is still 2 minutes from arriving. That is not marksmanship. Marksmanship is the small part. That is judgment, of a kind that takes a particular life to build, a life I had not bothered to imagine for the water girl by the cans. Down the line, Pike had felt the wind change on his own neck too. "Conditions coming over," he said, half to himself, half to the crowd, and there was a warning in it, a range master's instinct to tell a shooter that the wind was about to betray them. But she did not come up off the gun. She did not flinch toward her dials. She lay dead still as the whole basin heaved, as the flags all down the target line swung together and lay over hard to the right, all of them, the wind driving steady from the left draw now, cold and even and held. The mirage stopped boiling and began to run, a clean flat run, one direction, readable as a printed page. The chaos had resolved into the one honest condition of the morning. And into that stillness, that one held breath of clean wind, she pressed the trigger. I did not hear the shot so much as feel it. The flat, hard crack of the heavy rifle rolling out across the basin and coming back off the rimrock a half-second later. Through my scope I caught the trace, the faint ruled line of the bullet's wake climbing out across the mirage, and I followed it the way you follow a thrown rope, up and out and impossibly far, 4 seconds of flight that felt like 4 minutes, the round arcing high over the basin, and beginning its long fall toward the deep steel 3/4 of a mile away. I watched that trace hold its line against the steady left wind she had waited for. It did not bend the way Doyle's had bent. It rode the clean condition all the way down, and I lost it in the shimmer near the target, and for one whole second the world hung there with nothing in it but the wind and the flags. Then the plate rang. At that distance you see it before you hear it. The plate jumped, a bright hard swing on its chains, dust leaping off its face where the round struck true, and a full second and a half later the sound of the hit came rolling back across the basin, a deep clear bong that carried the length of the plateau and up into the visitor stands and off the rimrock behind us. A center hit. Dead center, cold bore, first round, on the plate that had beaten 21 national-level shooters clean all morning long. on the plate that anchored the record I had held for 11 years. Nobody made a sound. I want you to understand the quality of that silence, because I have never heard another like it. It was not the silence of people who are not impressed. It was the silence of people whose understanding of the world has just been struck out from under them and who have not yet found their feet. 22 men who had come up believing they knew what was possible, who had watched the best among them fail at this exact thing not 30 minutes before, were now looking at a private from the water detail lying in the dust behind a school loaner rifle, and a plate 3/4 of a mile away was still swinging on its chains from a round she had put dead through its heart. The mockery had no purchase anywhere. There was nothing to laugh at and nothing to say. There was only the ringing plate, and the wind, and a silence so total I could hear the pencil roll off the data book when she moved her arm. She did not celebrate. She did not look back at the crowd to see her triumph on their faces, the way any of us would have, the way I would have at her age. She stayed down behind the rifle, cheek to the stock, and she watched the plate through her scope until it stopped swinging, the way a craftsman watches a joint set. Then she made a small mark in the data book. One mark, a record of a thing done. And I understood that for her this was not a miracle and not a victory over anyone. It was a shot she had known she could make, made under conditions she had chosen, entered in a book because that is what you do. The whole meaning of it lived out here on our side of the rifle, in the ruin of our certainty, in the plate still faintly humming. On her side of the rifle there was only the work, done correctly, as it had been done 10,000 times before, in places she had not yet told us about. It was Doyle who broke the silence, and he broke it the way a man breaks who cannot bear what he has just seen. "Luck," he said. "It came out too loud and cracked in the middle. That's nobody reads that basin. That was a lucky round." He looked around for agreement, for other men to shore up the wall that had just come down inside him, and he found a few. You always find a few men nodding, muttering, "Lucky, has to be luck, a broke clock," because the alternative was unbearable. The alternative was that a private they had laughed at could do a thing that they, the best of 3 commands, could not do, and that she could do it cold, first round off a rack rifle, on the meanest wind the basin had shown in a decade. Luck was the door they ran for. I understood it. I nearly wanted it to be true myself. Pike did not run for that door. Pike was still staring out at the far steel with an expression I had never seen on him in 30 years. The look of a man watching a thing he built his whole life on quietly rearrange itself. But he was the range master, and the range master's job is to be sure, and Doyle's word hung out there in the air demanding an answer. So Pike turned and looked down at the private in the dust, and he asked the only question that could settle it, and his voice was not mocking now. It had gone very careful. "Was that luck, Private?" She did not lift her cheek from the stock. She was already reading the wind again. I saw her eyes moving across the flags, across the mirage, doing the slow, deep work a second time. And she answered him without any heat, the same flat, even voice she'd used to ask for the lane, and it was the first long thing I heard her say. "No, Master Guns," she said. The condition held for about 40 seconds when it swung. It's swinging back now, the right draw's coming up, you can see it in the sage by the 2000 marker. In about a minute it'll settle again the other way and hold a little shorter. 10, maybe 15 seconds. She paused, still reading. "I'll take the same plate on the second settle, so it isn't luck." I heard someone in the crowd draw a breath, because that was not a boast. A boast is a thing you say about the past. She had just called her shot into the future, named the exact piece of wind, from a change that had not happened yet, and staked the whole argument on hitting the same impossible plate again inside a 10-second window she alone could see coming. It was the single most audacious thing I had ever heard a shooter say on a firing line, and she said it the way you'd read a bus schedule. And then she stopped talking, and she waited, and every soul on that plateau turned to watch the sage by the 2000-meter marker to see if the wind would do what the water girl said it would do. It did. I watched it happen through my own glass, and I will tell you it was worse, better, more than the first shot, because this time we were all watching for it, all of us reading the same signs she'd named, and none of us able to read them the way she did. The right draw came up. You could see it walk across the basin the way she'd said. The sage heads by the 2,000 marker shivering and laying over first, then the flags catching it one by one down the line, the whole condition heaving back the other way. The mirage boiled and churned through the change, that ugly unreadable middle where every champion had died all morning, and then, just as she'd promised, it began to settle. The flags came around to a steady right lean. The boil flattened into a clean run the other direction. A held condition, the mirror of the first, and by her word it would last 10 or 15 seconds and not a breath longer. She had already made her adjustment. She'd done it while she talked, 2 quick sure movements on the turret, reading the coming condition off the sage before it arrived, so that when the wind finally settled into the shape she'd foretold, she was not scrambling to catch it. She was lying there waiting for it, solution already on the gun, the way you wait with your hand on a doorknob for a knock you know is coming. The condition settled, she pressed the trigger. The crack rolled out. The trace climbed and arced and fell, 4 long seconds across 3/4 of a mile of wind she had mapped in her head, and it rode the clean right condition down without a waver, and the plate rang a second time. Dead center. A bright hard swing on the chains, dust leaping off the steel, and a second and a half later that deep clear bong rolling back across the basin and up off the rimrock, the same true note as before. 2 for 2. Cold bore and called shot, on the plate that had beaten 21 national shooters clean. In the 2 hardest and most opposite conditions the whole cruel morning had to offer, and she had named the second one before it arrived. There was no calling it luck now. Doyle's word lay dead on the ground where he dropped it. You cannot flip a coin heads twice on demand and call both throws luck. The thing collapses under its own foolishness. The silence this time was different from the first. The first had been shock, the pulling out of the rug. This one was something closer to awe. And under the awe, in a lot of those men, the beginning of shame. Because we had all laughed. Every one of us on that line had, at the least, let the laugh stand. And now we were watching a private lie in the dust and read the wind like scripture and put 2 rounds through the heart of the impossible, and there was nowhere left to hide from what that made us. She came up off the gun then. Not fast. She ran the bolt, cleared the rifle, and checked it safe out of pure habit, the deepest habit there is, the kind you only build by handling a rifle for years in places where a careless muzzle costs a life. Then she pushed up out of the dust and came to her feet and stood there, small and brown-armed and still-faced, the school loner held safe across her body, and she looked at Pike and waited to be told what a private waits to be told. Pike walked down the line to her. The whole crowd watched him do it, the range master crossing his own firing line to stand in front of a private from the water detail, and the plateau was so quiet you could hear his boots in the grit. He stopped in front of her. He was a full head taller and 30 years older, and he had run this range like a hard church his whole life, and he looked down at her with that weathered, sun-cured face, and for a long moment he did not say anything. He was looking at her the way you look at a thing you have gotten completely wrong, trying to see now what you should have seen before. "Where did you learn to read wind like that?" he said finally. It was not quite a question. It was closer to a man asking to be told the truth so he could stop guessing at it. And she told him, not to boast, I never once heard a boast in her, not that whole day. She told him because he was the range master and he had asked and it was his line and he had a right to know who was shooting on it. She said a name. Not her own, a call sign, the working name of a shooter, the kind of name that gets logged on records and left off of faces. She said it plainly, the way you'd give your rank. They logged me as Nightjar, Master Guns. I heard Pike's breath go out of him. And down the line, I heard it go out of a few others too, the older ones, the instructors, the men who'd been around long enough to know the records that hung on walls like ours in ranges across the country. Because Nightjar was not a name you learned on a range like Ashfall. Nightjar was a name you learned from the records, the long-distance record holder, the one whose card hung on more than one wall, the confirmed extreme-range shooter that the discipline knew by that single logged name and had never, as far as any of us had heard, put a face to. The face had never mattered. Only the card. Only the distances written on the card, distances that made even Ashfall's deep steel look close. She had come up on the water truck with the range detail, and she was the name on the wall. Pike stood there and worked it through, and I watched the last of his certainty go out of him. Not violently, not with any collapse, but quietly, the way a tide goes out, leaving him standing on ground he did not recognize. He had looked at her that morning and been sure he knew her worth. He had told her not to hurt anybody, and she had been, the whole time, standing right there among the water cans, the one shooter on the continent who could have walked onto his cursed range and made it kneel. His whole life's certainty, I can look at a person and know what they are worth, had been the thing that blinded him to her. That is the cruelty of that kind of certainty. It does not feel like a wall. It feels like sight. He did the thing then that made me respect Orland Pike more in that minute than in the 30 years before it. He came to attention. A master gunnery sergeant, 60 years old, the hardest man on that plateau, drew himself up in front of a private and brought his hand up in a slow, deliberate salute. A salute to the call sign, to the record, to the shooter he had failed to see. It was against every regulation of rank. You do not salute a private. It was not about rank. It was one craftsman acknowledging the master of the craft, in the only language of respect his body knew, and every man on that line understood it, and not one of them laughed. She did not smirk at it. She did not soak it up. She looked, if anything, faintly uncomfortable, the way a serious person is uncomfortable being made a spectacle of, and she gave him a small nod and said, quietly, "You run a hard range, Master Guns. It's an honest one. That's rarer." And she meant it. It was the only thing all day I heard her say that came from somewhere warm. She respected the range. She respected the wind that had beaten the champions, because she knew better than any of us how worthy an opponent that wind was. She had not beaten it with contempt. She had beaten it with respect and years, and a discipline the rest of us had only visited. Which brings me at last to my own part in it, and to the wall. I had not moved from behind my spotting scope that whole time. I had watched the entire thing through the glass with my heart going and my certainty coming apart in my chest, and I had not said a word because what was there for me to say? I was the man who held the record. I was the monument they pointed at. 11 years, cold bore, first round, 2,100 meters, the number that had defined the best thing I ever did, the thing the younger men measured themselves against. And I had just watched a private put 2 called rounds through a plate 200 meters past my record, in a wind meaner than the one I'd set it in, off a rack rifle she'd never fired, on the second and fourth shots of her whole day at Ashfall. My record was not broken so much as it was gently, thoroughly, and permanently retired. The monument had been standing in a museum that a living master had just walked through on her way to lunch. I could have run for Doyle's door. I want to be honest that the temptation was there, low and mean, in the oldest part of me, the loner rifle, the perfect condition, if I'd had my own gun, if I were still 30. Every excuse a proud man reaches for when the thing he was best at is done better in front of him by someone he'd overlooked. I stood up from behind the scope with all those small, ugly doors open around me, and I made myself walk toward her instead, and I have been glad every day since that I did. Pike saw me coming and stepped aside, because Pike knew what my record was. He'd been there the morning I said it. The crowd knew too. They understood, in the way a crowd understands these things all at once, that the record holder was walking up to the woman who had just erased his record, and they went quiet again to watch what an old champion does at the end of his reign. I think a few of them expected me to challenge it, to find the flaw, to defend the wall the way Pike had joked about at the start of the whole business. Brannigan, want to defend the wall. I stopped in front of her. Up close she was younger than I'd thought and older in the eyes than her years, the way people are when they've spent a long time doing something that costs. I looked at that still, plain, weathered face, and I thought about the water cans she'd carried 2 at a time, and the way she'd walked to the ready rack like it was a room she'd built, and how I'd smiled, settling in to watch her fail. I thought about 19 years of standing on firing lines being sure I could read a shooter at a glance, and how that sureness had shown me a water girl where a master lay, exactly the way Pike's had. We were the same, Pike and I. We had built our whole selves on an eye we trusted, and our eye had lied to us in the same breath, about the same person, and only her rifle had told us the truth. There is a thing you can do at the end, when someone has bettered you at the one thing you were. You can guard the wall, or you can be the one who takes the old card down. I put out my hand. She looked at it a moment, and then she took it, a hard, dry, work-calloused grip, a shooter's hand. And I said the only thing there was to say, and I said it loud enough to carry, because I wanted the men who'd laughed to hear the record holder say it plainly. That plate's held my number for 11 years, I said. It was the best thing I ever did. You just put 2 rounds past it in the worst wind I've seen on this range, cold, off a rack gun, and you called the second one before it broke. I held her hand and her eye. The record's yours, and it isn't close. I'd be proud to take my card off that wall myself. Something moved in her face then, for the first time all day, not much, just a slight easing around the eyes, the look of a serious person hearing a serious thing said straight. She held my hand a beat longer than the shake required. You said it cold in first round, she said, in this basin. 11 years nobody touched it. She let that sit. That's not a small card, Master Sergeant. Don't take it off like it was. And I understood she was giving me something back. She did not have to. She could have let the wall be hers and let me be the old man who used to hold it, and she'd have been within her rights, because the rifle does not lie and the rifle had spoken. But she knew, the way only another master of the thing could know, exactly what it had cost me to set that number in that wind 11 years ago, and she was not going to let the men who'd laughed reduce it to a thing she'd stepped over on her way in. She respected the shot the way she respected the range and the wind, honestly, at its true weight. That was the whole of her, I think, laid bare in one sentence. She had no use for taking anyone down. She only had use for the truth of the thing, told at its right size. Pike took my card off the wall himself in the end. He did it that afternoon in front of the whole trial, and it was not a sad ceremony the way I'd have feared. He read the old number off it, my name, the distance, the date 11 years gone, and he said, in that basin-filling voice, that it had stood honest and long and had been beaten honestly at last, and that was the only way a good record should ever end. Then he took a fresh card and he wrote the new number and the new distance on it, and where a name goes he wrote the only name she'd give, the logged one, the call sign, and he hung it on the wall of the range shack where mine had hung. Nightjar. 2 rounds called, in the meanest wind Ashfall had shown in a decade. No face on the card. Just the shot, and the name the records knew her by, hanging in the little shack where every shooter who ever came up to be humbled by that basin would read it and wonder who she was, and never once guess she'd carried the water in. She left on the truck that afternoon with the range detail the way she'd come. That is the part almost nobody believes when I tell it. She did not stay to be feted. She did not let the officers buy her a place at the long table. She helped drag the marking frames in and coil the target line rope and load the water cans back onto the truck, 2 at a time, the same as the morning, and when it pulled out in the long gold light she was in the back of it with the other privates, and I stood on the empty firing line and watched the dust of it go up the range road and over the rise. She had come up to Ashfall on a work detail, broken the deepest record 3 commands had, retired the man who held it, made the hardest range master in the country salute a private, and then she'd loaded the cans and gone, because the work was done and there was other work somewhere that she was needed for. The shot had never been about us at all. We were only the ground it happened to land on. I have run that morning over in my head more times than I could count in the years since, and I have tried to be honest with myself about what it taught me, because a thing like that is wasted if you only tell it as a good story. Here is the truth of it, as near as I can get. I had spent 19 years believing I could look at a person on my firing line and know what they were worth. It felt like wisdom. It felt like the reward of all that experience, that I no longer had to wait and see, that I could see straight off. And it was the exact thing that blinded me. My eye was so full of what I already knew that there was no room in it for what I didn't. I looked at a small woman carrying water and my experience told me, instantly and with total confidence, range, detail, nobody, not a shooter, and my experience was a liar. And it lied to me with the voice of certainty, which is the only voice we ever really trust. Pikes did the same. The whole lines did. 22 good men and 2 old hard experts, and every one of our trained eyes told us the same wrong thing about her at a glance, and not one of us doubted it until her rifle made doubt impossible. The wind at Ashfall humbles shooters. That morning, it humbled something deeper in me than my shooting. It humbled the thing I was proudest of, my eye, and showed me it had been a shut door dressed up as sight. She never gloated. I keep coming back to that because it is the part that finished the lesson. If she had rubbed our faces in it, I could have gotten angry, and anger would have let me off the hook. A man can stay the same forever if you give him something to resent. She gave me nothing to resent. She read the wind, made the shots, told the truth about my card, loaded the water, and left. She let the plain fact of what she'd done do all the work, and the plain fact went into me clean and stayed, the way only an undramatic truth can stay. The men who'd laughed had nothing to push against either, and I watched more than one of them go quiet and stay quiet the rest of that trial, chewing on it, the way you chew on a thing that has changed you before you've decided to let it. I still instruct at Ashfall. I am older now and more of a monument than ever, and the young shooters still point me out to the new ones. That's Brannigan. He held the deep record 11 years, till a private off the water truck broke it cold in the worst wind anybody's seen. They tell it as a legend now, and it has picked up the shine that legends get, and I let most of the shine stand because the bones of it are true. But when a new shooter comes up cocky, sure he has the measure of the place, I take him out to the shack and I show him the card on the wall, nightjar, 2 rounds called no face, and I tell him what really happened, the whole of it, including the part where I smiled, settling in to watch her fail. Especially that part, because the shot is not the lesson. Any fool can be impressed by the shot. The lesson is the water cans, and the laugh, and the certainty in 24 trained eyes that all pointed the same wrong way at once. I tell them what she told Pike near the end, when he asked her how a person learns to read wind like that. He'd asked it like a man asking for a secret, and she'd thought about it a moment, in that still way of hers, and she'd given him the truest answer I ever heard on a firing line, and I give it now to every shooter who thinks he already knows what he's looking at. You learn it, she said, by being wrong about the wind a few thousand times, and never once deciding you've got it figured out. Then she'd picked up the water cans, 2 at a time, and walked to the truck. I did not have her figured out. Neither did Pike, nor Doyle, nor any of the champions 3 commands sent up to be humbled that day. We had her figured out completely, at a glance, with all our years and all our expertise, and we were wrong, every one of us in exactly the same way about exactly the same person. That is the shot I really carry out of Ashfall. Not the plate ringing 3/4 of a mile out in a killing wind, though I hear that too some nights, that clean deep bong rolling back off the rimrock. What I carry is the water girl standing up out of the dust with a rack rifle held safe across her body, small and plain and unbothered, having just quietly unmade everything I was sure I knew, and then loading the cans and going, and leaving the wall to speak for her. It speaks for her still. I make sure of it. That is a monument's proper work in the end, not to stand there being pointed at, but to keep an honest card on the wall, and to tell the truth about the morning a private carried the water in and left as the best shot any of us had ever seen. The wind at Ashfall never sleeps, but it taught me once to keep my eyes open. I have tried to ever since.